She had two choices: walk away from the country that had become her home, or call the most dangerous man she had ever known. Nyla Brooks spent 6 years building something real in Seoul. 6 years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and paint-stained hands turning nothing into something that mattered. And now, with less than 24 hours before Korean immigration erased all of it, she was staring at a name in her phone she swore she would never dial again. Seo Jin-hwan, former mafia boss. A man who made entire criminal organizations flinch. If you're watching this from your city, drop it in the comments below, and follow this channel to find out whether one desperate phone call destroys her completely or saves everything she has left. Hit that like button and stay until the very end. This story is just getting started. The apartment smelled like turpentine and burnt coffee, and the particular kind of dread that settles in your chest when you already know how bad things are, but your brain keeps running the math anyway, hoping the numbers change. Nyla Brooks stood in the middle of her studio, which was also her living room, which was also technically her dining room because Seoul rent did not care about your feelings, and she held the open envelope like it was a verdict, which it was. The letter from the Korean Immigration Service was printed on crisp government paper with neat, indifferent typeface, and every single word of it was a wall closing in. Her F4 visa extension had been denied. The reason cited was a paperwork discrepancy in her sponsorship documentation. Her gallery, the one that had been backing her residency for the past 3 years, had quietly dissolved its art sponsorship program 4 months ago without telling any of its represented artists. She had found out the same way she found out about everything important lately. Too late. From a form letter. Alone in her apartment at 11:30 at night. 22 hours and 40 minutes. That was what the clock on her phone said when she did the math. After that, she was in violation. After that, immigration could pick her up, process her, and put her on a flight back to Atlanta. Back to a city she loved but had not called home in 6 years. Back to a life she had deliberately and carefully left behind because staying would have meant becoming someone smaller than who she knew she could be. She set the letter down on the kitchen counter next to a half-empty mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She looked around the apartment. The walls were covered in her work, large format canvases layered with texture and color that people had started paying real money for, work that had been reviewed in 3 Korean art publications and 1 international one, work that had gotten her a mention in a Seoul Cultural Digest alongside artists who had been doing this for 20 years. 6 years of that. 6 years of this city working its way into her bones until she could not imagine painting anywhere else. Because the light here was different. The pace was different. The loneliness was a specific kind that had shaped her art in ways she could not replicate somewhere else. She was not going to lose this. The problem was she did not know how to keep it. Her phone had been in her hand for the past 40 minutes. She had called her lawyer, voicemail. She had called the gallery director, a short, uncomfortable conversation that ended with the man apologizing in the specific way that meant he was not going to do anything. She had called 2 other artists she knew who had navigated visa complications. One of them had married a Korean citizen, and the other had simply left and reapplied from outside the country, which took 8 months and gutted her career momentum. Nyla had scrolled through every contact she had who might have a connection, an angle, a resource. And then her thumb had stopped on a name she had not touched in 4 years. Seo Jin-hwan. She had almost deleted it so many times, she was not sure why she hadn't. Maybe because deleting it felt like pretending that period of her life had not happened, and Nyla Brooks had never been interested in pretending. She dealt in reality. She painted reality. She had no patience for the cleaned-up version of things. The number had a note next to it in her contacts that she had written years ago, half as a joke, half as a warning to herself. Do not. Seriously, do not. She stared at it for a long time. Jin-hwan had not been in Seoul for... She did not know exactly how long. The last thing she had heard, through channels that were themselves several degrees removed from anything official, was that he had left, walked away from the CO organization entirely. There had been rumors about why. A power struggle. A death. Something that had broken something in him that could not be repaired inside the life he was living. The details were vague, and she had not chased them because she had been trying, consciously and deliberately, not to think about Seo Jin-hwan at all. They had met 6 years ago, 8 months after she arrived in Seoul. She had been doing a residency at a small studio space in Mapo-gu, The kind of place that accepted international artists and didn't ask too many questions about their financial situation. And one evening she had been at a gallery opening she almost hadn't attended. Too tired, too underdressed, half a glass of wine into talking herself into leaving early, when a man in a dark suit had stopped in front of one of her pieces and stood there for 4 full minutes without saying a word. She had noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit its surroundings. He was tall for a Korean man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that was not relaxed. It was controlled, the stillness of someone who had trained themselves out of involuntary movement. His face was severe, not unkind exactly, but closed in a way that communicated clearly that he was not available for small talk or surface-level interaction. 2 men stood at a careful distance behind him, and they were watching the room in a way that had nothing to do with art. She had walked over to him because she was the artist, and it was her work, and she was not going to be intimidated by expensive tailoring and a security detail. "You've been standing there a while," she said. He turned and looked at her. His eyes were dark and direct, and they assessed her in a single pass with a thoroughness that should have felt rude, but somehow didn't. "It's a complicated piece," he said. His English was precise, slightly formal, better than most. "It's not that complicated. You're the artist." "Yes." He looked back at the painting. "Then explain what I'm missing." She explained. He listened without interrupting, without nodding politely, without any of the performance of listening. He just listened, and when she finished, he asked one question that told her he had understood every word. They talked for 20 minutes. She found out his name. She did not find out, until 3 weeks later when a mutual acquaintance went pale at the mention of it, exactly who Seo Jin-hwan was. By then it was already complicated. What they had was never clean and never simple, and never the kind of thing either of them could name without it immediately becoming something neither of them wanted to examine too directly. It lasted a year. It ended because his world was violent and hers was not, and she had eventually reached the point where she could not keep pretending she wasn't afraid of the things that moved at the edges of his life. She had ended it. He had not argued. He had looked at her with those dark, controlled eyes and said, "You're right to go." And she had not known whether that was generosity or just the precise and accurate reading of a situation by a man who was always, always right about how things were going to end. She had not spoken to him since, and now it was 11:47 at night, and she had 22 hours left, and she was holding her phone with his name on the screen. She pressed call before she could think about it anymore. Thinking about it was not going to help. She had already thought about it for 40 minutes, and all that had produced was a tightening in her chest and a cold cup of coffee. It rang 4 times. She was already composing the voicemail in her head. Professional, brief, just enough to explain, "Don't let him hear how scared you are," when the line opened. Silence. Just the ambient sound of somewhere that was not a city. Wind, distant. "Jin Hwan." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "It's Nyla." A pause. Not long. "I know." Of course he knew. He had probably known before the first ring finished. "I need help," she said, because there was no version of this conversation that benefited from a long approach. "Immigration situation. My visa expires in 22 hours, and I'm out of options." Another pause, longer this time. She heard him exhale, slow and deliberate, like a man recalibrating something internal. "Where are you?" "My apartment. Mapo-gu." "You're still in the same place." "Yes." Something in the quality of the silence shifted. "I'm not in Seoul," he said. "I know. I heard you left." She kept her voice even. "I'm not asking you to come back to Seoul. I'm asking if you have contacts who can—" "Nyla." His voice had not changed in 4 years. Still that same register, low and unhurried, the voice of a man who was never in a rush because he had never needed to be. "What exactly are you asking?" She had rehearsed this part. She had written it down on the back of an envelope 20 minutes ago and then thrown the envelope away because writing it down made it look insane, and she did not need visual confirmation of how insane it was. "I'm asking if there's any legal mechanism that could solve a visa expiration in under 24 hours, she said carefully. "Any mechanism." Silence. "Any," she repeated. She heard him breathe. She heard the wind wherever he was. She heard the specific quality of a very intelligent, very dangerous man working through the architecture of what she was actually saying. Marriage, he said. It would provide immediate legal grounds for Nyla. I know what I'm asking. I don't think you do. I know exactly what I'm asking, Jinhwan. I've been awake for 18 hours and I've run through every other option, and this is the one that's left. Her voice was still steady, barely. I'm not asking you to feel anything about it. I'm asking you to consider a legal arrangement that would benefit both parties. How does it benefit me? She had been ready for that. The orchard, she said. Silence again. Different quality this time, sharper, more compressed. She had done her research in the same 40 minutes she had been agonizing over calling him. Word got around in the Korean art community, which overlapped in strange ways with old money, which sometimes overlapped with the kinds of families that had made their money in ways that were not always clean. She had heard the CO family pear orchard mentioned twice in the past year in the context of rural debt consolidation and agricultural loan defaults. It was not hard to find the general shape of the problem once she knew where to look. You've been doing research, he said. Not an accusation, an observation. I research everything before I make a decision. You know that about me. The orchard situation is more complicated than whatever you found. Tell me how complicated. He did not answer immediately. She heard him move, footsteps on something that sounded like wood, and then a door, and then the wind got slightly louder. He was outside now. She pictured him standing in the dark on a porch somewhere in the mountains and felt the strangeness of that image against the memory of him in Seoul, the suits and the cars and the weight of all that organized power moving around him. 18 million in agricultural debt, he said finally. Balloon payment due in 7 months. The land has been in my family for 40 years. I have money, she said. Not 18 million, but my work has been selling. I have savings. And if I'm legally resident, I can work the commercial contracts I've been turning down because they required long-term residency guarantees. She paused. Between my savings and the contracts, I could cover a significant portion. And I know people in the Seoul art community who invest in rural cultural tourism projects. The orchard. Stop. She stopped. You've built a whole plan, he said. In 40 minutes. 38. The silence this time had something different in it. Almost. Almost like something that might have been the beginning of a sound that was almost a laugh, except that it died before it became one. Nyla. I know. This is not a small thing you're asking. I know that too. If we do this, he stopped himself. If I agree to consider this, there are conditions. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Jinhwan, I have 22 hours. I know how many hours you have. I can be in Seoul by morning, 6 a.m. A pause. If you want to talk about this, we talk in person. Those are my terms. She pressed her fingers to her forehead, closed her eyes. 6 a.m. That left them roughly 16 hours to file emergency paperwork, assuming they agreed to anything, assuming the agreement even held up under immigration scrutiny, assuming 100 things she did not want to think about all at once. Okay, she said. Get some sleep, Nyla. I'm not going to sleep. I know. And then, before she could say anything else, he ended the call. She stood in the middle of her apartment for a long moment with the dead phone in her hand. The city outside her window was doing what Seoul did at midnight, glowing, moving, indifferent to individual crises, the great grinding machinery of 11 million people continuing without any consideration for her specifically. She looked at her paintings on the walls, 6 years of her life looking back at her. She did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and her laptop, and she worked through every document she could compile, every financial record, every piece of paperwork that might be relevant, and she did not let herself think about what she had just set in motion, or what it meant that some part of her, some part she was not examining closely, had called his number first before she had even fully exhausted the other options. She told herself it was strategy. She was good at strategy. She was good at looking at a situation clearly and identifying the most direct path through it, and this was the most direct path, and that was all it was. She told herself that until 4:30 in the morning, when she finally stopped pretending she was going to sleep and went to stand at her studio window and watch the first gray suggestion of dawn touch the Han River in the distance. At 5:45, her phone buzzed. A message. No greeting, no name. Downstairs. He was 11 minutes early. Of course he was. She grabbed her folder of documents, her jacket, her keys. She did not check herself in the mirror. She did not need to look composed. She needed to think clearly, and those were different things. She took the stairs instead of the elevator because she needed the 20 seconds to breathe. She came out of the stairwell door into the lobby and saw him immediately. 4 years. He was wearing a dark jacket over a plain shirt, no tie, no suit. The most casual she had ever seen him in clothes that probably still cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was leaner than she remembered, or maybe it was just that he was standing differently. Not the coiled, watchful tension of a man permanently braced for the next threat, but something else. Something older and quieter, and in certain ways more unsettling because she could not immediately read what it was. He had a small cut healing above his left eyebrow. His hands were different. She noticed that in the first 3 seconds. Rougher. The hands of a man who had been doing physical labor. He looked at her the same way he always had. That single, direct, complete assessment that took in everything and gave nothing back immediately. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "You drove through the night," she said. 4 hours. He glanced around the lobby. Empty except for a half-asleep security guard at the front desk. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" "There's a cafe on the corner that opens at 6. They walked there without talking. The street was quiet, the morning air cold enough to see their breath. The city just beginning to wake up around them in the incremental way it did. A delivery truck, a bakery exhaust fan, the first train running somewhere underground. She was acutely conscious of him walking beside her. The specific gravity of it. She had forgotten, or had forced herself to forget, the particular quality of being in proximity to someone who had once mattered to her in ways she had deliberately filed away, under over and done, and not relevant anymore. She reminded herself why she had called him. She reminded herself what this was. The cafe was warm and almost empty. They took a corner table. The owner, an older man who knew Nyla by sight, brought 2 coffees without being asked. Jinhwan wrapped his hands around the mug and looked at her. "Tell me the full situation," he said. Everything. She told him. She did not soften it or frame it strategically. She laid out the facts in order, the gallery's program dissolution, the paperwork discrepancy, the timeline, the conversation she'd already had, the doors already closed. He listened the way he always listened, with that quality of total attention that made it feel like everything she said was being recorded and processed and would be recalled with perfect accuracy later. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The lawyer you mentioned, he called me back at 3 a.m. He confirmed what I already knew. The standard extension process takes a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks. Emergency humanitarian grounds take at least a week and require medical documentation. The only immediate legal solution is a change in status tied to a qualifying relationship. Marriage. Marriage." He looked at his coffee. "You understand what my name carries. I know what your name used to carry. I did my research on where you are now, too." Something shifted in his jaw. "And?" Seo Jin Hwan, formerly of the Seo Criminal Organization, currently residing at the Seo Family Agricultural Estate in North Chungcheong Province, where you have been for approximately 18 months managing a pear orchard with your younger brother and a staff of 4. She paused. "You're not in the life anymore." "No." "But your record exists." "Yes." "That complicates the immigration application." "Yes." He looked at her directly. "Which means the interview will be harder. They'll look for inconsistencies. They'll push." "I know." "We would need to be convincing." "I know that too." He was quiet again. Outside, a bus went past. Inside, the cafe owner turned on a small television behind the counter, sound low. The morning was getting lighter through the windows. Nyla drank her coffee and made herself hold his gaze and not look away, because looking away would have meant something she was not prepared to mean. "There is a condition," he said. "You mentioned conditions last night." "One condition," he said, "one rule. If we do this, if we sign the papers and go through the interview and build whatever story they need us to build." He paused. The pause was heavier than it should have been for a practical negotiation. "No falling in love." She stared at him. "I'm serious," he said. His voice had not changed. "This is a legal arrangement, a contract. It ends when your residency is secure and the debt situation is resolved. Those are the terms, no complications. Nyla set her coffee down. She looked at this man she had not spoken to in 4 years. This man who had once stood in front of her painting for 4 minutes and then listened to her talk about it with the kind of attention most people reserved for things that genuinely mattered to them. This man whose hands were rough now, and who had a healing cut above his eye, and who had driven through the night from the mountains because she called him when she was out of options. That's a strange rule to need to say out loud, she said. His jaw tightened fractionally. Do you agree to it or not? She picked up her coffee again. I agree. He nodded once. Then we need to move fast. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. I have a contact at the district civil registration office. Old connection, not criminal, administrative. He can process the marriage registration by noon if we're there before 9. You already made the call. I made a preliminary inquiry, in case you said yes. She looked at him for a long moment. You were always like that, she said. Like what? Already 3 steps ahead. He did not respond to that. He was already looking at his phone, already moving. She watched him for 1 second, just one, and then she picked up her folder of documents and told herself again, clearly and firmly, that she knew exactly what this was. She told herself that. She believed it. Mostly. The civil registration office on Mapodayero was the kind of government building that existed to process human lives into paperwork. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, a numbered ticket system, forms printed in a font that managed to make every declaration feel bureaucratic and small. Nyla sat in one of the plastic chairs with her folder on her lap and watched Jin Huan speak quietly with a man in his 50s at the counter. She could not hear what was being said. She watched the man's face go through something complicated. Recognition, then discomfort, then a kind of resigned professionalism that suggested this was not the strangest thing Jin Huan had ever asked of him. She thought about Atlanta, not because she wanted to. She just did, the way your mind goes to the thing you're trying not to become. She thought about her mother's kitchen and the particular smell of it and the look on her mother's face when Nyla had told her she was moving to South Korea to make art, which had been received with a specific mixture of love and incomprehension that her mother had been applying to most of Nyla's decisions since she was 16. She thought about the life she would go back to if this did not work. Not bad. Not nothing. Just not this. Not the person she had become here, in this city, doing this work. She was not going back. Jin Huan returned to the chair beside her. We'll be called in about 20 minutes, he said. The filing will take approximately 45 minutes. By noon, the registration should be processed and we can take the documentation to the immigration office this afternoon. And the interview? They'll schedule it within 30 days. Could be sooner if they flag the timeline. He paused. They'll flag the timeline. We should start preparing. Yes. We don't know much about each other anymore. He looked at her sideways. We know enough. Do we? He was quiet for a moment. I know you still take your coffee without sugar. I know you don't sleep when something is unresolved, which is why you look the way you look right now. I know you did 38 minutes of research before making a phone call you'd been dreading making because you don't act without preparation even when you're frightened. He paused. And you know things about me. I know things about who you were. People don't change as much as they like to think. People change more than they want to admit, she said. He turned and looked at her fully. In the hard fluorescent light of the government waiting room, she could see the years differently than she could in the soft early morning light of the cafe. There was more gray at his temples. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. There was something in his face that she did not have a clean word for. Not sadness exactly, more like the specific texture of someone who had carried something heavy for a long time and learned to move with it rather than put it down. She looked away first. Their number was called. They went to the counter. A young female clerk processed their documents with the efficient disinterest of someone who had filed 10 marriages before lunch and would file 10 more after. She asked them several standard questions. Nyla answered them. Jin Huan answered them. The clerk typed. A printer ran. More forms. Signatures in 3 places. Jin Huan's handwriting was small and precise and completely legible, which she noticed and then told herself to stop noticing. At 11:57, the clerk stamped a document, slid it across the counter, and said in flat official Korean, Congratulations! Your marriage registration has been filed. Nyla held the document. She looked at it. Seo Jin Hwan and Nyla Brooks. The date? The official seal. She had been in Korea for 6 years. She had painted its light and eaten its food and learned enough of its language to argue with taxi drivers and negotiate gallery contracts. She had made a home here out of stubbornness and talent and the specific kind of determination that only works when you genuinely cannot imagine doing anything else. And now she was married to a former Korean Mafia boss in a government office in Mapo-gu, and the clerk was already moving on to the next number, and Jin Hwan was sliding the document carefully into his own folder without looking at her, and the fluorescent lights were humming, and somewhere in the building a phone was ringing. Outside on the steps, the November air hit her like something physical. She stood there for a moment, document in hand, looking at the street. Jin Hwan stopped beside her. "We should go to immigration this afternoon to initiate the status change," he said. "And we need to discuss the living arrangement." She turned to look at him. Living arrangement. "For the interview to hold, there will need to be evidence of cohabitation." His voice was even, professional, stripped of anything personal. "My apartment in Seoul has been sublet. I've been in the mountains. The obvious solution, you want me to move to the orchard, temporarily, for the duration." She stared at him. She thought about her apartment, her studio, her city. She thought about the mountains of North Chungcheong province, which she had never visited, which she knew only as a place on a map that was very far from everything she had built here. She thought about the immigration interview, and the scrutiny, and what it would mean if it fell apart. "How long," she said, "until your permanent residency is secured? 6 months, possibly 8. 6 months. In the mountains, with Seo Jin Hwan." Under a contract that included a rule about not falling in love, which meant the rule existed for a reason, which meant somewhere in his carefully controlled and precise and forward-thinking mind, he had considered it a risk worth naming. She did not say that. "Fine," she said instead. "I'll need to pack my studio equipment. I'll arrange a truck. I have a lot of canvases. I have a large farmhouse." She nodded. He nodded. They stood on the steps of the Mapo-gu Civil Registration Office in the cold November morning air, two people who had just legally bound their lives together for reasons that had nothing to do with love, in a contract that specifically prohibited it, and the city moved around them the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and beautiful, not caring at all what any of this meant. Her phone rang. She looked at it. The immigration office, returning her earlier call. She answered, walked down the steps, began explaining the situation. Jin Hwan stood on the steps and looked at the street, and she did not look back at him. And she told herself that the strange, tight feeling in her chest was just exhaustion and stress and the accumulated weight of a very long and very difficult 24 hours. She told herself a lot of things that morning. The drive to the immigration office took 40 minutes in midday traffic. They sat in the back of a car Jin Hwan had summoned. A driver, no conversation. She worked through the paperwork. He looked out the window. Seoul went past in its layers, old neighborhoods compressed against new ones, markets and glass towers, and the Han River glimpsed between buildings. At the immigration office, they waited 2 hours and then spent 45 minutes in a small room with an official who looked at their marriage certificate with a specific skeptical tilt to her head that made Nyla's stomach clench. The official asked questions. How long had they known each other? Where had they met? Why had they married so quickly? Jin Hwan answered everything in Korean, smooth and factual, and Nyla answered in the English that was then translated, and she noticed that Jin Hwan's answers and her answers matched, not because they had rehearsed them, but because they were true, the basic facts of how they had met and how long they had known each other, and the only things that weren't technically true were the things they didn't say. The official made notes. She told them an interview would be scheduled. The timeline would be expedited given the visa status situation, likely within 2 to 3 weeks. She gave them a form and a number, and told them to keep all documentation in order. Back outside. 4:30 p.m. The sun was already getting low over Seoul. 2 to 3 weeks, Nyla said. We should go to the orchard as soon as possible. The sooner we're established there, the stronger the evidence of cohabitation. When? Tomorrow morning. He looked at her. Can you pack tonight? She thought about her apartment, 6 years of accumulation, 200 square feet of a life. The important things, she said. Yes. He nodded. I'll be here at 7. And then something happened that she was not prepared for. Something cracked through the professional surface of the conversation just for a second, just a fraction, and she saw it in his face. Not the controlled, forward-planning efficiency of someone executing a strategy. Something else. Something older. He looked at the city for a moment, and his jaw was tight, and he looked briefly and completely like a man who was doing something that cost him something he was not acknowledging. It was gone in a second. He looked back at her. 7 a.m., he said. Get some sleep this time. He walked toward the car. She watched him go. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Seoul immigration office with a folder of documents in her hand and a marriage certificate in her bag, and the particular sensation of having crossed a line she could not uncross. And she thought, I know why he made that rule. She thought, I know why, and it doesn't change anything. She thought, I'm going to be fine. The low winter sun cut across the glass face of the office building and split into 1,000 pieces of light, and somewhere across the city, in an apartment she was going to pack up tonight, 200 paintings waited on the walls like witnesses. And somewhere to the south and east, in the mountains of North Chungcheong province, there was a farmhouse and a pear orchard and a debt that was going to eat a family's 40-year legacy alive, unless something changed. She turned and walked to the subway station. She had packing to do. She had about 36 hours before her life changed in ways she had not fully calculated yet. And she was very good at calculating, and the fact that her calculations kept returning incomplete results when she tried to account for one specific variable was something she was absolutely not going to think about. Tomorrow. She would think about it tomorrow. Her phone buzzed. A message. No name, but she knew. The orchard is quieter than Seoul. You might hate it. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back. I've handled worse than quiet. 3 dots. Then, yes, you have. She put the phone in her pocket and went down into the subway. And the train came, and the city swallowed her the way it always did, and she held the pole in the crowded car and let herself feel, just for a moment, just one unguarded moment, something that she was not going to name, in the direction of a man she was not going to fall in love with. The train moved. The lights flickered. Seoul rushed past in the dark tunnels beneath its own skin, and Nyla Brooks held on. The truck arrived at 6:58 in the morning. Nyla had been awake since 4. Not because she couldn't sleep. She had slept. 3 hours. Hard and dreamless the way you sleep when your body simply stops negotiating. But because there was something about the act of packing a life into boxes that required doing slowly and in private, without witnesses. She had wrapped her canvases in brown paper and foam, stacked them against the hallway wall in order of size. She had boxed her paints, her brushes, her bottles of medium and gesso and fixative. She had packed 2 suitcases of clothes and 1 box of things that were not practical but that she was bringing anyway. A photograph of her mother, a ceramic mug she'd bought at a market in Insadong in her first year in Seoul, a small painting she'd done at 19 that was technically bad, but that she had never been able to leave behind. She did not pack everything. She left the furniture. She left the books she could replace. She stood in the doorway of her stripped studio for a long moment and looked at the pale rectangles on the walls where the paintings had been, the ghost shapes of 6 years, and then she pulled the door shut and went downstairs. Jin Hwan was leaning against the truck, talking to the driver in low Korean. He had a paper cup of coffee in one hand. He was wearing work clothes, dark pants, a plain jacket, boots that had mud on them already, which meant he had gone back to the orchard last night and returned this morning, which meant he had driven 4 hours twice in less than 24 hours. He looked at her when she came out, looked at the boxes visible through the lobby glass. Is that everything? The canvases are stacked in the hall. There are 14 large ones. He said something to the driver, and the driver went inside. Jin Hwan held out the paper cup. I got you coffee. It's probably cold. She took it. It was cold. She drank it anyway. You drove back last night. I had things to handle at the orchard. You could have stayed in Seoul. I have a farm, he said. Like that explained everything. Like a farm was a thing that simply demanded your presence, and that was the end of the discussion. She let it go. The loading took 40 minutes. The driver and a second man, Jin Hwan, had handled the heavy canvases with the careful, efficient professionalism of people who had been told very clearly that these items were not to be damaged. Nyla supervised the loading of her studio equipment, Jin Huan stood back and let her direct it, which she appreciated without saying so. At 7:45, they pulled out of Mapo-gu. Seoul thinned around them as they drove south and east, the density compressing and then loosening, the apartments giving way to lower buildings, the lower buildings giving way eventually to the elevated highway, and the Han going broad and flat to the west and then disappearing behind them entirely. Nyla watched it go. She had not said goodbye to the city. She told herself she would be back. 6 months, maybe 8. Not forever. She watched Seoul disappear in the side mirror anyway. They drove in silence for most of the first hour. It was not hostile silence. It was the silence of two people who were not yet sure what kind of talking this situation required, which was a different thing. Jin Huan drove. She had expected a driver, but he drove himself, which was another small revision to the image she had been carrying of him. He drove the way he did most things, with complete attention and no excess movement, no fidgeting with the radio, no checking his phone. She had her earbuds in for 30 minutes and then took them out because the music felt wrong somehow, too much of a barrier. They passed through Cheonan, through Cheongju. The landscape changed, mountains in the distance first, then closer, then around them. The particular quality of inland Korea in November, all muted color and stripped trees and the specific beauty of a landscape that had given up pretending to be anything other than what it was. "Tell me about the debt," she said. They were about 40 minutes out from the orchard. He was quiet for a moment. "My father took the agricultural loan 8 years ago. Expansion of the orchard, new cold storage facilities, equipment. The interest rate was variable. It adjusted 4 times in the first 3 years. He paused. He died before the first balloon payment came due. She had not known that. She had not known his father was dead. "I'm sorry. The land is worth more than the debt if we can sustain the yield for 3 consecutive seasons. 1 bad harvest and the bank can force liquidation." His voice was completely flat when he said this, the flatness of someone who had been over the numbers so many times that the emotion had been worn off them by repetition. Last year was the second good season. This year was difficult. Late frost in March damaged 40% of the early crop. "How much did you lose?" "Enough to put the 3-season calculation back to 0. He turned onto a smaller road and then a smaller one. "My brother manages the day-to-day. He's good with the land. He is not—" He paused, choosing something. "He doesn't handle the financial side well." "How old is he?" 24. She thought about that. A 24-year-old managing a pear orchard in the mountains with 18 million in debt and an older brother who had spent years running a criminal organization. She thought about what that family dinner table must have looked like at various points in their history, and then decided she would find out soon enough. The farmhouse appeared at the end of a long gravel drive, set against the mountain like it had grown there. It was bigger than she had pictured. A traditional Korean farmhouse expanded and modified over decades, stone and old timber, and a newer addition on the east side that was probably the cold storage infrastructure. The orchard spread out behind it and up the slope, the trees bare and gray in the November light, row after row of them. Something about the regularity of them unexpectedly beautiful in the way that only functional things can be beautiful. A young man came out of the front door as the truck pulled in. He looked like Jin Huan around the jaw and the eyes, but everything else was softer. He moved with an openness that his older brother had lost somewhere along the way, or more likely, had never been allowed to develop. He was wiping his hands on a cloth, and he stopped when he saw the truck. And then his eyes found Jin Huan getting out of the car, and then they found Nyla, and she watched him recalibrate the entire shape of what he had been told about this situation in the space of about 3 seconds. Hyung. He said it the way younger siblings say things when they're trying to figure out how concerned to be. "Jun?" Jin Huan walked to him, said something low in Korean, and the young man, Jun, looked at Nyla again. And this time the look was not suspicious, so much as overwhelmed, in the specific way of someone who has been handed one more complicated thing to absorb on top of too many other complicated things. He switched to English. His was accented but comfortable. "I'm Seo Jun," he said. "You're Nyla?" "Yes." He told me about the situation. "Okay." He stopped, started again. "I hope this works out for your visa." "Thank you." It was not warm exactly. It was not cold either. It was the carefully measured response of a young man who was trying to be decent under circumstances that had not asked for his input. She respected it. She could work with it. She could work with most things, as long as they were honest. Jin Huan showed her the room. It was on the second floor of the old part of the house, east-facing, with a window that looked out over the orchard. The room was clean and bare, a bed, a wardrobe, a low table. The walls were white plaster, and the floor was wood, and the light that came through the window in the late morning was the clear, unhurried light of a place that had no buildings between it and the sky. "The studio space," he said, opening the door across the hall. It was empty. Large enough. Raw wood floors and a high ceiling and north-facing windows, which was what she needed. She stood in the doorway and looked at it and did not say anything for a moment. "It was storage," he said. "I had it cleared last week." She turned and looked at him. "Before I called you." He did not flinch. "I had been thinking about practical uses for the space." He paused. "It's possible I had been thinking about more than that. I don't know. It doesn't matter." It mattered. She filed it away without commenting on it. "It's good space," she said. "The light is right." He nodded. "Dinner is at 7. June cooks." He moved to leave. "Jin Huan." He stopped in the doorway. "Thank you," she said. "For the room, for the space." He was quiet for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You haven't seen what winter is like up here." He left. She stood in the empty studio space and listened to the silence of the mountain, which was not actually silence. There was wind, there were birds, there was the sound of the orchard moving, but which was so different from the layered noise of Seoul that her nervous system did not immediately know what to do with it. She started unpacking. The first week was the careful, exhausting work of two people learning to share space without a shared language for what they were to each other. They were not strangers. That was the problem. With a genuine stranger, you had a template. You had manners and courtesy and clear lines. With Jin Huan, she had 4 years of archived knowledge about his specific habits and preferences and the weight of a history that did not have a clean ending. And all of that knowledge was simultaneously accurate and completely out of date, which made every interaction a small act of calibration. He woke early. She heard him at 5:30, the particular sound of someone moving through a house with the practiced quiet of someone who has never wanted to be caught off guard. Not the exaggerated quiet of someone trying not to wake others, just the natural quiet of a man who had trained himself out of unnecessary noise. He went to the orchard first thing, before coffee, in the dark. She knew this because on the third morning she woke at 5 and lay in the dark and listened to the sound of the front door closing, and then silence, and then nothing but wind. She painted in the mornings. The mountain light was extraordinary. She had not expected that, or maybe she had expected it academically, but not in her body. Not the way it actually fell across the floor of the studio at 8 a.m. In November, almost horizontal, throwing every texture into high relief. She painted faster than she had in years. She did not know what to make of that, and so she didn't make anything of it and just kept painting. In the afternoons, she went to the orchard. This was not a decision she announced or justified. She just started going. The work was physical and repetitive and cold, and she was not good at most of it initially, but she learned. June showed her things without being asked to: how to check the soil moisture, how to read the early signs of frost damage on bark, how to operate the irrigation system that ran beneath the snow-dusted ground. He was cautious with her for the first few days, and then he was not. Because June's caution had an expiration date that hit when he decided someone was genuine, and she was genuine, which he seemed to understand. Jin Huan watched her work in the orchard the first time without saying anything. Then the second time, he moved to where she was working without comment and handed her a different tool and showed her without words the correct grip for what she was doing. His hands over hers for about 3 seconds, adjusting the angle. Then he moved away. She stared at the tool in her hand. She went back to work. The argument started on day 9. It started, as arguments in close quarters usually do, from something small, or something that appeared small from the outside, which is different from something that actually is. She had come in from the orchard to find a package on the kitchen table. It was addressed to her. She opened it and found inside a set of professional-grade cold-weather work gear, insulated gloves, thermal underlayer, proper waterproof boots in her size, with no note, no explanation. She stood in the kitchen holding the boots and felt something complicated move through her that she did not want to feel. Something that was part gratitude and part something else. Something that was the beginning of a feeling she had specifically contracted not to have. She went to find him. He was in the orchard, running the pruning line on the east section, his breath visible in the cold air, working with the economical precision she had come to recognize as his default physical register. "You don't need to buy me things," she said. He looked at her. He had pruning shears in his hand. "Your gloves are inadequate for this climate." "I have gloves." "You have city gloves. This is not the city." "I'm aware of that." She heard the edge in her own voice and knew it was not really about the gloves, but also could not fully stop it. "I don't need you managing my—" "I'm not managing anything." His voice was flat. "Your hands are cracked. I saw it yesterday. You need proper gear or you'll lose sensitivity in your fingers by January, and you're a painter, so that's not—" "Don't." The word came out harder than she meant it to. "Don't treat me like something that needs to be maintained." He stopped. He looked at her with that direct, complete attention. "What do you think I'm doing?" "I think you're doing what you always do. Managing everything at a distance. Solving problems before they're problems so you never have to deal with the actual people involved." Something moved across his face. Not anger. Something more controlled than anger, and, she suspected, more dangerous. "You've been here 9 days," he said. "I know how long I've been here." "Then you don't know enough to—" "I know you," she said. "That's the problem." The pruning shears went still in his hand. The orchard was quiet around them, the bare gray trees in their rows, the cold air carrying their breath away. She could hear her own heartbeat. She was aware that she had said something that was true in a way she had not fully intended it to be, and that he had heard all of it. He turned and went back to his work. She stood there for a moment. Then she took the boots back inside and put them on, because they were better than her city boots, and standing on principle in inadequate footwear in a North Chungcheong November was not something she was willing to do. But the exchange left something unresolved. It sat in the farmhouse with them the way unresolved things do. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. At dinner that night, June talked about the irrigation schedule and the upcoming assessment visit from the agricultural bank, and the possibility of a late winter market in Chungju, where they might be able to move the stored product. And Jin Hwan responded, and Nyla responded, and it was all completely normal on the surface, and underneath it was not normal at all. Later, when June had gone to bed, she was washing the dinner dishes, and Jin Hwan was still at the table with the bank documents spread out in front of him. She could see them reflected in the dark window above the sink, columns of numbers, his hand moving a pen, the particular kind of focus that meant he was working through something he had worked through before and was hoping for a different answer this time. "How bad is the assessment?" she said. Not a question, a pause. "Bad enough. Can you show me?" Another pause, longer. "You don't need—" "Jin Hwan." She turned around. "We agreed this was a partnership, not just for the immigration thing, for this too. I can't help if you won't show me the actual numbers." He looked at her across the kitchen. The overhead light was spare and practical, and it made his face look older, more tired. He picked up the bank documents and held them out. She dried her hands and sat down across from him and looked at the numbers. They were worse than he had implied. The balloon payment structure was brutal. Interest had been accruing during the 2-year grace period in a way that meant the principal had grown rather than reduced, and the current operating income from the orchard was covering roughly 60% of the annual carrying costs, which meant the remaining 40% was coming from a reserve account that had about 5 more months of capacity. The agricultural bank's assessment visit, scheduled for 3 weeks out, was going to reveal all of this in an official context that would accelerate the timeline for default consideration. She looked at the numbers for a long time. He let her look. He did not explain or interpret, which she appreciated. She did not need things explained to her. She needed to be trusted to understand them herself. "Okay," she said finally. "I have 240,000 American in savings. At current exchange, that's your money. We talked about this. You talked about it as a theoretical structure. The actual numbers are—" He stopped. "It's too much to ask." "You're not asking. I'm offering." She looked at him directly. "We made a deal. I keep my end." "The deal was about your visa. The deal was about both problems. The visa and the land. You know that. We both knew that." She held his gaze. My savings, plus the commercial contracts I can start taking now that my residency status is changing. I've already had 2 inquiries this week. Corporate installations, large format. They pay well. She paused. It gets us close enough to the balloon payment that with 3 good months of orchard income, we could cover the shortfall. He stared at the table. His jaw was tight in the specific way it got when he was managing something that he did not want to feel. This is not how I... He stopped again. Not how you what? I don't take money from people. The words came out harder than the conversation warranted. She heard the history in them, the pride and the shame braided together, the specific wound of a man who had spent years being powerful and was now in a position that looked, from certain angles, like dependency. I'm not people, she said. I'm your wife. She heard how that sounded the moment it left her mouth. Legally, she added. He looked at her. Something moved through his eyes that was fast and complicated and not entirely controlled, which was unusual enough that she noticed it the way you notice a crack in something you thought was solid. Legally, he repeated, flat, careful. Yes. The words sat between them, on the table next to the bank documents, and the dinner dishes, and the cold remnants of the evening, and neither of them moved to clear it away. Outside the farmhouse, the wind was picking up. She could hear it testing the old eaves, running along the mountain's edge, carrying the smell of coming cold. The first real snowfall of the season was probably a week out. June had mentioned it, practical and matter-of-fact, the way farmers talked about weather, as a thing to prepare for rather than a thing to feel about. She thought about Seoul. She thought about her apartment's pale ghost walls, and the subway car, and the city that did not know or care whether she stayed or went. She thought about the immigration interview that was coming, the scrutiny that was going to pull at the seams of everything they had built and look for the places where it did not hold. She thought about the 3 seconds in the orchard when his hands had adjusted hers on the tool. She thought about the boots in her exact size. She thought about a studio cleared of storage before she had called him, cleared on the private possibility that she might. She thought, I'm in serious trouble. Not the immigration kind, the other kind. The kind she had promised, in a government building in Mapogu, not to be in. She gathered the bank documents into a neat stack and pushed them back across the table. I'll have a full proposal for you by the end of the week, she said, standing. Cash flow projections, contract income estimates, payment schedule. Let me actually help. He looked up at her. For a moment she saw it again. That unguarded fraction, the thing beneath the controlled surface, tired and complicated and real. Nyla, he said. What? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the table. Good night, he said. She nodded. She walked to the stairs. She was halfway up when she heard him, quietly, below. The boots are good quality. They'll last 10 years. She stopped on the stair, her hand on the railing, her chest doing something she was absolutely not going to acknowledge. I know, she said. Thank you, Ed. Thanks. She went up. She went to her room. She lay on the bed with the mountain wind moving outside and the orchard invisible in the dark beyond the window, and the feeling in her chest that she had no name for expanding quietly in the dark, like something that had been given just enough warmth to grow. 3 days later, the storm came. It was not the gentle first snow June had predicted. It came in fast from the northwest, hard and horizontal, and by the time the weather alert hit Jin Hwan's phone at 11 p.m., it was already there. Temperature dropping 8 degrees in 4 hours, wind driving snow through every gap in the old farmhouse's skin, and outside in the orchard, 40% of this season's remaining fruit still in the cold weather cover frames that had not been fully secured because the forecast had not called for anything like this. Jin Hwan was out the door in under 2 minutes, June 30 seconds behind him. Nyla heard them, heard the urgency of it, and she was dressed and at the back door in her new boots and her new insulated gloves before either of them had reached the first row of trees. Jin Hwan turned and saw her in the porch light, and for 1 second she thought he was going to tell her to go back inside. He didn't. He threw her a headlamp and said, East section. Cover frames on rows 7 through 12. The clips on the east side pull tight and lock down, counterclockwise to secure. Go. She went. The next 2 hours were the most physically demanding thing she had done since she could not remember. The wind was vicious, and the snow was the wet, heavy kind that soaked through everything, and the frames were stiff with cold, and her hands ached even through the good gloves. And she worked row after row in the dark, with the headlamp cutting a white tunnel through the driving snow, securing clips and checking frames and calling out to June when she found a section that needed 2 people. Somewhere in the middle of it, working the clips on row 10 with numb fingers and her face raw from the wind, she heard Jin Hwan's voice close behind her. "You've done 9 already." "I know how to count." He came alongside her. They worked row 10 together without discussion. She secured the near side clips while he moved along the far side, their rhythm becoming a thing without words, just the physical logic of 2 people doing a job in hard conditions, finding the pace that fit the situation. She could hear him breathing. She could hear her own breathing, harder than she wanted it to be. The wind pushed at them both and the snow was coming down thick now. Visibility cut to maybe 20 feet, the orchard around them reduced to the immediate arc of the headlamps, and the next row, and the next clip. Row 11. Row 12. She slipped on ice and caught herself on the frame and felt the metal cold through her gloves and then his hand on her arm, fast and immediate, steadying her, and then gone just as fast. No comment, no pause, just the automatic response of a body moving to keep another body upright. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her ears. They finished row 12 at 1:20 in the morning. June was already ahead of them, finishing the north section, his headlamp a moving point of light in the dark. Jin Hwan checked the last frame, pulled the securing clip hard, and stepped back. He looked at the row. Then he looked at her. Snow was in her hair. Her face was red with cold. She was breathing hard and her hands were shaking slightly, and she was also, she realized, smiling. Some involuntary physical response to the adrenaline and the cold and the strange, bone-deep satisfaction of having done a hard thing in the dark and gotten it done. He looked at her smiling in the middle of a snowstorm in his orchard. Something happened in his face. Something she saw clearly and completely before he could stop it. Not the fraction of an unguarded moment, not the quick flash she had been catching in peripheral vision. This was full and direct, and she saw all of it. Something that looked, with terrifying clarity, like a man looking at the thing he was most afraid of wanting. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it was gone, locked back behind whatever door he kept it behind. He turned away. "We need to get inside," he said. His voice was perfectly even. "June?" June came jogging up. "North section's done. We got it all." Jin Hwan nodded. He walked back toward the farmhouse without looking at her again. June fell into step beside Nyla. He glanced at her sideways with the specific look of a younger sibling who has seen something he understands and is choosing not to comment on. They walked through the snow to the back door, and the light was on inside, warm and yellow in the dark. And the farmhouse was solid, and the orchard was secure, and the storm was howling around all of it, like it wanted in. She stepped through the back door into the warmth. She pulled off her soaked jacket, her gloves. Her hands were shaking still, but differently now. Not just cold. She stood in the kitchen doorway and she thought about 3 seconds in the dark in a snowstorm and the look on the face of a man who had made a rule to protect himself from exactly this. And she knew, with the particular clarity of a feeling that had been growing in the dark for weeks and had just been given enough light to see itself clearly, that the rule was already broken. Not by her, by both of them. And in the morning, the immigration office called to confirm their interview date, 14 days. The interview date landed on the kitchen table like a stone. 14 days. Nyla read the confirmation email 3 times, standing in the kitchen in her damp socks, her jacket still dripping onto the floor, the storm still working at the farmhouse windows. 14 days meant they had exactly 14 days to become, on paper and in person and under direct interrogation, a couple that a trained immigration officer would believe was real. She looked up from her phone. Jin Hwan was at the sink running cold water over his hands, his back to her. June had already gone upstairs. The kitchen was warm and close and smelled like wet wool and the leftover heat from dinner and the particular intimacy of a space that 3 people had been sharing for nearly 2 weeks. 14 days, she said. I saw. He did not turn around. We need to start preparing. Tomorrow. Jin Hwan. Tomorrow, Nyla. He turned off the water, turned around. His face was controlled, but she could see the tiredness beneath it, the deep structural exhaustion of a man who had been holding too many things in tension for too long. It's 1 in the morning. We just spent 2 hours in a storm. Tomorrow. She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded. Tomorrow. She went upstairs. She did not sleep for a long time. Tomorrow came gray and cold. The storm reduced to a sullen overcast that sat on the mountains like a held breath. June went to the orchard early to assess the damage. Jin Huan made coffee and set 2 cups on the kitchen table and sat down. And when Nyla came downstairs at 7, he was already there with a notebook and a pen, which meant he had been thinking about it since before she woke up. She sat across from him. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. What do we need? They'll ask about how we met, timeline of the relationship, why we married when we did. He tapped the pen against the notebook. The timeline is the problem. 6 years since we met, 4 years since we last spoke, marriage filed in under 24 hours. It's going to look like exactly what it is. Unless we explain it differently. Unless we explain it with enough truth that it holds under pressure. He looked at her. The interviewing officer will be looking for inconsistencies, hesitation on specific questions, emotional responses that don't match the stated narrative. He paused. They're trained for this. So are you, she said. Something crossed his face. That's not something I'm proud of. She had not meant it as a compliment or a criticism, just a fact. She let it sit. What do we need to know about each other that we don't already know? He looked at the notebook. He had written a list. She could see it from across the table, neat, precise handwriting, a column of questions. He turned it toward her. She read it. The questions were practical. Her family background, her childhood, her education, the details of her career trajectory, her life and soul broken down year by year, her medical history as it pertained to documentation. Standard things, the kind of things 2 people who had been together would know. She looked up. These are the easy ones. Yes. The hard ones are the ones that don't have answers that fit on a list. He was quiet. Why did I call you? She said. Not the practical reason, the real reason. They'll ask that. His jaw tightened. You called me because you were out of options. That's the practical reason. Sometimes the practical reason is the real reason. Not this time. She held his gaze. They'll ask why. Out of every person I know in Seoul after 6 years, I called a man I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. And if I hesitate on that answer, or if it sounds rehearsed, they'll pull at it. She paused. So I need to know what we're going to say. And for that to work, it needs to be something close enough to true that neither of us flinches. He was very still. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a crow called once from somewhere in the orchard. Why did you call me? He said. Low. Not quite a question. Because I trust you, she said. Even after 4 years. Even after everything. When it was the worst moment, you were the person I trusted. She kept her voice even. That's true. That's what I'll say. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that he did not quite manage to lock down before she saw it. Okay, he said. His voice was slightly different, slightly less flat. Okay. They worked through the list for 2 hours. She told him things she had not thought about in years. Her childhood in Atlanta, her mother who worked 2 jobs and made her go to art camp every summer despite the cost. The year she had a full scholarship to SCAD and still almost did not go because leaving felt like abandonment, and she had needed 3 months to talk herself into believing she was allowed to want more than what she had been given. He listened to all of it with that quality of complete attention. He asked clarifying questions that were precise and never personal in a way that felt invasive. Just the questions of someone building an accurate picture. Then it was his turn. He talked about the orchard, about growing up here, in this house, the particular texture of a childhood shaped by seasons and labor, and a father who was severe and demanding, and also, in the specific way of certain Korean men of his generation, deeply proud of his sons, in ways he could not say directly. He talked about the organization, not the details, not the operational specifics, but the shape of it, how he had been positioned into it at 19 by connections that were family connections and therefore not really choices. How power had accumulated around him in ways that felt inevitable from inside and probably looked chosen from outside. She had known some of this, not all of it. The year before I left, he said. He stopped. She waited. There was a man, senior member of the organization. I had trusted him for 6 years. His voice was completely flat now. the flatness of something that had been worked over so many times it had no surface texture left. He was moving money through channels that undermined the organization's external agreements. I found out. I confronted him. He paused. He had been anticipating it. He had prepared a narrative in advance, documentation, witnesses. He positioned me as the source of the breach. He looked at the table. It took me 4 months to dismantle it, and during those 4 months, 3 people who were loyal to me were hurt because of my association. She did not say anything. When it was resolved, I left, he said. I came here. I had been thinking about leaving for longer than that, but that was the thing that... He stopped. That was the thing. The rule, she said quietly. About not falling in love. He looked at her. It wasn't about me, she said. Not an accusation, just the understanding of it, arriving fully formed. When you said that in the cafe, it wasn't about protecting me from the complications. It was about what happens to people near me. His jaw was tight. What happened to people near me? Consistently. Over years. He looked at his hands on the table, the rough hands, the healed cuts, the evidence of a different kind of life. I trusted someone for 6 years. I was wrong, and the cost of that was not mine to pay. The kitchen was very quiet. That's what I meant, she said after a moment. When I said I trusted you, even after 4 years, even knowing... She gestured slightly. All of it. I still called you first. He looked at her. The look was longer than it should have been for the conversation they were technically having, which was a preparation session for a government interview. It was the look of a man who was hearing something that landed somewhere the practical surface of the conversation was not supposed to reach. Nyla, he said. Don't, she said. Not unkind. Not right now. Let's just finish the list. He looked at her for 1 more second. Then he looked down at the notebook. Okay, he said. Finish the list. The next 10 days were the hardest and strangest of her life, which was a sentence she would not have predicted a month ago. They practiced. Every evening after dinner, June tactfully found reasons to be elsewhere, and they sat at the kitchen table or in the front room and went through the questions. The Immigration Board's standard battery, which Jin Huan had obtained through channels she did not ask about, plus the more specific questions that his record would certainly generate. They did it like drilling a scene, call and response, building the rhythm until the answers came without hesitation, until the true parts and the constructed parts were woven together tightly enough that she could not feel the seam while speaking. But the drilling kept cracking open things they had not planned to open. On day 4, she was answering a question about their first argument, a standard intimacy marker, the kind immigration officers asked to test whether a couple's knowledge of each other had the texture of actual lived experience. And she had given the prepared answer, the gallery opening 4 years ago, the disagreement about something that had felt important then and felt small now, and Jin Huan had shaken his head once, barely perceptible. What? She said. That's not our first argument. It's the one we agreed. Our first argument was in the 3rd month, he said. You did an installation that required working with a logistics company I had a connection to. You found out about the connection, and you came to me directly, and you told me... He stopped, something in his face. You told me you would not let my world contaminate your work. Those were your words. She remembered. She had not remembered until he said it, and then she remembered completely. The specific anger of it, the righteousness of it, and underneath that the fear, which she had not admitted to herself at the time, that his world was already contaminating things whether she acknowledged it or not. I was right to say that, she said. Yes, he said. You were. The simplicity of his agreement was worse than a defense would have been. That's the answer, she said after a moment. For the interview, that argument. Why? Because it's real. And because it shows we had a relationship with stakes in it. That's what they're looking for. Evidence that we were real people to each other. Not just... She stopped. Not just 2 people running a contract, he said. Yes. They looked at each other across the table. The lamp between them threw their shadows back against the wall, large and slightly wavering. We were real people to each other, he said. Careful. Factual. Whatever else it was. Yes, she said. We were. On day 9, she was in the studio working when she heard a vehicle on the gravel drive. Not Jin Hwan's car, not June's truck. Something heavier and unfamiliar. She put down her brush and went to the window. A silver sedan. A man she did not recognize getting out, looking up at the house with the particular quality of someone who had an appointment they were not announcing. Suit, despite the cold. Young, maybe 30, with the specific blankness of expression that in her experience indicated either bureaucratic appointment or something worse. She went downstairs. Jin Hwan was already at the front door. She stood at the foot of the stairs and watched the conversation on the front step, conducted entirely in Korean, low and rapid. She could read Jin Hwan's body, the still controlled tension of it, the way his shoulders changed by a fraction. Whatever this was, it was not welcome. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. The man left without coming inside. Jin Hwan closed the door. He turned around. His face was doing something she had not seen it do before. Not the controlled stillness. Something underneath the stillness that was cracking through it. Something that she identified after a second as the specific expression of a man receiving a consequence he had been dreading for longer than he wanted to admit. "What happened?" she said. He looked at her. A long moment. "The bank. The assessment isn't for 5 days. It's not the assessment." He moved past her into the kitchen. She followed. He stood at the kitchen counter with his back to her, both hands flat on the surface, and she watched his breathing, deliberate, controlled, the breathing of a man managing a physiological response. "Jin Hwan," he turned around. "The man who undermined me 4 years ago," he said, "in the organization, the one I told you about." She felt something cold move through her. "Okay." He has been purchasing agricultural debt in this region for the past 18 months. Through a holding company, legitimate front, completely legal. He acquired our loan from the original bank 8 weeks ago. He paused. The word came out stripped of everything except its weight. Park Sung-jae. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it meant everything. "He bought your debt," she said slowly. "Specifically. Not randomly, no. He's been waiting. He's been positioning. The assessment visit is not from our agricultural bank. It's from his representatives." He looked at her. "The balloon payment clause in the loan agreement allows the note holder to accelerate the full payment if there is evidence of financial distress or misrepresentation in the original loan application." He paused. "My father signed that application. There were elements of my family's income that were not fully disclosed." The cold thing in her chest got colder. "He's going to call the loan. He's going to call it at the assessment in 5 days." He looked at her and his eyes were dark and direct and completely honest in the way they only were when he had run out of the energy required to be anything else. "The full 18 million, immediately, which we cannot pay." The kitchen was very quiet. "He could have done this at any point in the past 18 months, she said. "Why now?" Jin Hwan's jaw was tight. "Because now there's a marriage on record. A foreign national, a pending immigration interview." He held her gaze. "He's not just going after the land." The understanding of it moved through her slowly, and then all at once, the way cold water rises. "He's going after the interview," she said. "If your family's financial situation collapses publicly 5 days before the immigration interview, default, potential fraud allegations on the loan documentation, the immigration office reviews the financial stability of the sponsoring spouse as part of the residency determination." His voice was completely flat. "A spouse under active debt default proceedings with a prior criminal record facing potential fraud allegations, they'll deny the application." "Yes." "And then my status reverts to expired. You would have 72 hours to leave the country." She stood in the kitchen of the farmhouse at the foot of the mountains of North Chungcheong province, and she felt, with the clean physical clarity of something landing in the body before the mind has processed it, the full weight of what had been done to them. Not an accident, not bad luck. A man who had waited 18 months, who had bought the debt, and waited and watched and chosen this exact moment. The immigration interview, the foreign wife, the maximum possible point of vulnerability, to move. "He knew I was here," she said. "He has been watching me since I left Seoul, yes." And the marriage registration, he would have had access to that. Public record, within 48 hours. She looked at him. "He planned this around us." He planned this around me, Jinhuan said. You became part of it when you arrived. I did not. He stopped. Something crossed his face that she had not seen before, something that looked rawly and without the usual architecture of control around it, like guilt. I did not anticipate this specific vector. I assessed the risks when you called. I assessed my record, the interview complexity, the financial situation. I did not. I should have known he would move. You couldn't have known the timing. I should have known. The words were quiet and precise and entirely self-directed. You are here because I let you come here. You are in this because I said yes, and I did not fully account for what yes meant in the context of a man who has been waiting to destroy everything I have left. The kitchen light buzzed once, faintly, in the silence. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and she put both hands flat on the counter next to his, not touching him, just proximate, and she said, "Look at me." He looked at her. "I called you," she said. "I made the choice. I built the proposal. I moved here. None of that is something you did to me. It's something I did. You understand?" Her voice was steady, but her hands were not, quite, a small tremor that she could feel but probably could not see. "So we don't do the part where you decide this is your fault and shut down. We don't have time for that. We have 5 days. He looked at her for a long moment. His breathing was controlled, but she could see what controlling it was costing him. 5 days, he said. "What do you know about Park Sung-jae's holding company structure?" A pause. Something shifted in his face. A recalibration. The grief or guilt or whatever it was being filed somewhere accessible but not dominant. This was what she had recognized in him from the beginning, this quality, the ability to feel something completely and then set it aside and function. She had found it frightening once. Right now she needed it. "More than he would want me to," he said. "Then start talking." He pushed off the counter. He went to the table. He sat down and he began to talk, low and precise. And she sat across from him and she listened to a man who had spent years inside the architecture of a criminal organization begin to dismantle, from memory and instinct, and the very specific knowledge of someone who had once been trusted and then betrayed, the structure of the trap that had been built around them both. Outside the farmhouse, the mountain stood in the cold November dark. The orchard was quiet. The trees were bare. The storm had passed and left everything stripped and clear, and the sky was full of stars over the mountain, indifferent and old and very bright, the way the sky gets when there are no city lights to argue with it. Inside, 2 people who had promised each other they would not fall in love sat across a kitchen table and built, out of desperation and precision and the particular kind of trust that only exists between people who have already seen each other at their worst, the only plan they had. And somewhere beneath the plan, in the space that the plan could not quite cover, something that neither of them was naming yet was becoming too large and too real to keep pretending it wasn't there. The interview was in 4 days. The assessment was in 5. And Nyla Brooks, who had promised herself she was going to be fine, was sitting across from Seo Jinhuan at 1 a.m. in a farmhouse in the mountains, watching him think. And she was not fine at all. She was the opposite of fine in a way that had nothing to do with visas or debt or a man named Park Sung-jae who wanted to burn everything to the ground. She was in love with him. She had probably been in love with him for years. And the interview was in 4 days, and the trap was closing, and the only way out required both of them to walk into a government building and tell the truth. And the truth, she was only now understanding, was far more dangerous than either of them had planned for. They did not sleep. Not that night. Not really. Nyla got 2 hours somewhere around 4 a.m, her head dropping forward at the kitchen table, and Jinhuan put a blanket over her shoulders without waking her and kept working. When she came back to full consciousness at 6:15, neck stiff and mouth dry, and the lamp still burning between them, he had filled 4 pages of the notebook and had his phone out, and was speaking in low, rapid Korean to someone who was clearly not happy about being called at this hour. She sat up, rolled her neck, looked at the pages. What was on them was not a plan in the conventional sense. It was a map. The organizational structure of Park Sung-jae's holding company, as Jinhuan could reconstruct it from memory and inference, cross-referenced with the loan documentation they had on hand, annotated with the specific legal vulnerabilities of an accelerated payment demand made under a clause that required demonstrable evidence of financial misrepresentation. In the margin of the 3rd page, in smaller writing, original loan officer, Retired, Chongju. Seo Senior Disclosure Gap. Verbal representation only, no written record. Burden of proof on note holder. She looked up. He finished the call. He looked at her. He had not slept, and it showed. The specific quality of exhaustion that sits behind the eyes and makes them look older, more exposed. The misrepresentation clause, she said. Can he actually prove it? He doesn't need to prove it fully. He needs to create sufficient legal uncertainty to justify acceleration. With a prior criminal record in the family and a rushed marriage to a foreign national 5 days before an immigration interview, he paused. He doesn't need a conviction. He needs noise. Noise is enough to kill the interview. Yes. She looked at the notebook pages. The loan officer. His name is Choi Byung-soo. He processed the original application. He is 71 years old and retired in Chongju, and he is the only person alive who can attest to exactly what my father disclosed verbally at the time of signing. He picked up his coffee, which was cold, drank it anyway. I have a contact reaching out this morning. If Choi confirms the verbal disclosure was complete, the misrepresentation basis collapses. Sung-jae can still call the loan under standard default proceedings, but that takes 60 days minimum, long enough for the immigration interview to conclude. He looked at her. Long enough. What's the risk on Choi? Jin-hwan was quiet for a moment. Sung-jae will have thought of him. He's had 18 months to prepare this. Choi may already have been contacted. Pressured. Possibly. Then we need to get to him first. She stood up. Her legs were stiff. Her back ached, and she had paint under her fingernails from yesterday that she had not cleaned off, and it was cracking at the knuckles. She looked at Jin-hwan. Today. He was already standing. I'll drive. June appeared in the kitchen doorway in a sweatshirt, hair uncombed, reading the room with the quick accuracy of someone who had grown up in a house where the room frequently needed reading. He looked at his brother. He looked at Nyla. He looked at the 4 pages of notes. Tell me, he said. Jin-hwan told him. Brief, factual, no softening. June listened with his arms crossed and his jaw getting progressively tighter. When Jin-hwan finished, June was quiet for 5 seconds. Park Sung-jae, he said, you're sure? Yes. June's expression was specific, the expression of someone absorbing the confirmation of a fear they had been carrying and were not surprised by and were furious about anyway. He looked at Nyla. Are you okay? I'm fine. You don't look fine. Neither do you, she said. Neither does anyone in this kitchen. We can deal with the looking fine part later. Something in his face shifted. Respect, or the beginning of it, more complete than what had been there before. He nodded. What do you need me to do? Stay with the orchard, Jin-hwan said. If Sung-jae sends anyone before the assessment date, you don't let them on the property without written notice and a lawyer present. You have the number. I have the number. Don't open the door for suits. Understood. June looked at his brother for a moment. The specific look between siblings who have a language that does not require words, that is built from decades of shared space and shared history, and the particular grammar of people who have survived the same things. Hyung. I know, Jin-hwan said. They left at 7:15. The drive to Chongju was 90 minutes on the mountain roads in the early morning cold. The landscape stripped and pale and moving past the windows in the way landscapes do when you are in a car with someone, and neither of you is talking, and both of you are thinking at a frequency that fills the silence without needing words. About 40 minutes in, she said, The interview is tomorrow. Yes. Even if we resolve the Choi situation today, the assessment is still the day after. Sung-jae is still going to move. With the misrepresentation basis removed, his acceleration claim has no legal standing inside the interview window. He has other angles. Yes, Jin-hwan's hands were steady on the wheel. He'll use my record. He'll submit it to the immigration board as a supplementary concern. He has the contacts to do that. It will be on the officer's desk before we sit down. She looked at his profile, the jaw. The healing cut above his eye, nearly gone now. Then we don't hide it. He glanced at her. In the interview, she said, we don't hide your record or explain it away. We address it directly. We say, this is who he was. This is who he is now. This is the evidence of the change, the orchard, the work, The fact that he walked away. She paused. The officer will respect honesty more than they respect a clean record. You don't know that. I know people. She turned to look at the road. And I know what truth sounds like versus what performance sounds like. So do they. We walk in there and we tell the truth about everything, including what this actually is. A pause. What it became. The car was quiet. What it became, he said. Careful. Like the words had weight he was testing before putting his full force on them. Yes, he did not respond. She did not push. Outside, a river ran alongside the road for a while, gray and flat in the winter light, and then the road curved away and it was gone. Choi Byung-soo lived in a modest house on the east side of Cheongju, the kind of house that had been lived in for 30 years and showed it in the good way. A small garden in front, bare now, but with the structure of something tended. A dog barked when they pulled up. The old man opened the door before they knocked, which meant he had seen them coming, which meant he had been watching for someone. He was small, white-haired, with the specific wariness of a man who had spent his career in a position of mild institutional power and had retired into the relief of no longer being implicated in anything. He looked at Jin Hwan. He looked at Nyla. He did not look surprised, exactly, more like resigned in a way that confirmed immediately that they were not the first people to come about this. Mr. Choi, Jin Hwan said in Korean. I know why you're here, the old man said. He stepped back from the door. Come inside. The house smelled like rice and old newspapers. They sat in the front room. The dog, old, arthritic, deeply uninterested in drama, settled near the radiator. Choi sat across from them with his hands on his knees and the look of a man who had been sitting with something uncomfortable for long enough that he was tired of its weight. Someone called you, Jin Hwan said. 3 days ago, a lawyer. He explained the situation. Choi paused. He explained what my signature on an amended statement would be worth. Jin Hwan was very still. And I told him I was retired and not interested in legal complications. The old man looked at him steadily. Your father was a thorough man, Jin Hwan-si. I processed 100 agricultural loans in my career. He was among the most careful. Everything he disclosed verbally was consistent with the written documentation. There was no misrepresentation. He paused. I told the lawyer that. Something moved in Jin Hwan's throat. A swallow, barely visible. He'll try again. He already tried again. Yesterday. Choi looked at his hands. The number got larger. Mr. Choi, I said no. The old man looked up. Simple, flat, final. I said no because your father was an honest man who worked hard land, and I am 71 years old and I have nothing left to be afraid of. He paused. I will put it in writing, whatever you need. Notarized, witnessed, submitted to whoever needs to see it. The room was quiet except for the dog breathing near the radiator. Jin Hwan looked at the old man for a long moment. Something in his face that he was not trying to control, something open and unguarded that Nyla had not seen in this quantity before. Something that looked like grief and gratitude braided together in a way that he did not have the architecture to contain at this particular moment. Thank you, he said. His voice was not flat. It was the opposite of flat. Don't thank me, Choi said gruffly. Bring me the paperwork and let me sign it and go back to my garden. They had the notarized statement by 11:30. Jin Hwan scanned it and sent it to 3 separate recipients from the car. His lawyer, a contact at the Agricultural Regulatory Authority, and a third number she did not ask about. He put the phone down. He looked at the road ahead. One problem resolved, she said. Sungjae will move to the next angle. We know what the next angle is. Yes. He started the car. The interview. They drove back through the mountains. The sky had cleared and the light was the particular winter clarity that made everything look slightly more real than usual. Too sharp, too defined. Every bare branch and frost-edged field cut against the sky like something deliberate. She watched it and thought about tomorrow and felt the fear of it sitting in her chest alongside something else, something larger and warmer and considerably more frightening. They were 2 kilometers from the orchard when Jin Hwan pulled the car off the road onto a gravel shoulder and stopped. She looked at him. What? He was looking straight ahead, both hands on the wheel, engine still running. He was breathing with the deliberate control she knew meant something was happening underneath the surface, that the surface was working hard to manage. She waited. "I need to say something before tomorrow," he said. She said nothing. "The rule I made," he said. "In the cafe, no falling in love." He paused. "I told you it was to protect you." "You told me it was a term of the contract." "Yes." His jaw worked. That was not the full truth. She waited. The car idled. The mountain light lay across the dashboard. "It was to protect myself," he said. "Everything I have been close to, everything I have allowed to matter, has been used against it, against me, for years. My brother, the organization, my father's land." He stopped. His voice was getting shorter, the words more compressed, the way speech gets when it is moving through something that is resisting it. "You called me, and I said yes, and I told myself it was because the situation was solvable and the arrangement was logical, and I am good at logistics." He was quiet for a moment. "I have been lying to myself about the logistics since approximately the second day you were here." The car was very quiet. "Jinhwan," she said, "I'm not finished." He turned and looked at her, fully, without the architecture, without the control. Just his face, exhausted and honest, and containing the specific expression of a man who has run out of the energy required to be anything other than what he actually is. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to—" He stopped. "The last time I let something matter, it was taken apart in front of me and the people near me paid for it. And now Sungjae is— This is exactly what I was afraid of. That being close to me would cost you something you couldn't recover." "Stop," she said. He stopped. "The misrepresentation basis is gone," she said. "The interview is tomorrow, and we are going to walk in there and tell the truth, and the truth is going to be enough. And Park Sung-jae is a man who has been building a trap for 18 months because you left his organization and took your integrity with you, which means he is afraid of you, which means the trap is the action of a frightened man, not a powerful one." She held his gaze. "I am not afraid of a frightened man." Something moved through his face. "And I am not your liability," she said. "I am a grown woman who made every choice in this situation with full information, and I am still here and I am not leaving." She paused. "So you don't get to decide what this costs me. That's mine." He looked at her for a long moment. The mountain light, the bare trees, his hands on the wheel. Then he reached out and his hand covered hers on the seat between them, and he held it with the particular completeness of someone who had decided to stop being careful, and she felt her whole chest open up with it. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "After." "After," she agreed. He looked at her for one more second. Then he put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road. They got back to the orchard at 2 p.m. to find June standing on the front steps with his arms crossed and the specific expression of someone who has had a bad few hours and has been waiting to report on them. "2 men," he said, before they were fully out of the car. "Came at noon. Said they were from the Agricultural Assessment Office. I told them the assessment wasn't scheduled until tomorrow and asked for written notice. They didn't have it." He paused. "They left, but they took photographs of the property before they went. I watched from the window." Jinhwan looked at the gravel drive, then at the orchard, then at June. "You did right. There's something else." June pulled out his phone. "I got this an hour ago, from a number I don't know." He held the phone out. Jinhwan took it, read the message. His face did not change, not a muscle, not a flicker. He handed the phone to Nyla. The message was in Korean. She read it slowly. Her Korean was functional rather than fluent, but the meaning was not difficult. "Tomorrow's interview. Room 4B. Officer Lim Jae-wook. He has questions about the artist's prior associations in Atlanta before coming to Korea. Criminal background, U.S. side. We thought you should know. A friend." She looked up. "What criminal background?" Jinhwan was looking at her with the expression she least wanted to see from him right now. The careful, assessing look. The look of someone revising an assumption. "I don't have a criminal background," she said. "I have never been arrested. There is nothing—" "I know," he said. "Then what is—" "He's going to manufacture something." His voice was very quiet. "Or surface something that looks like something. An association, a financial irregularity, anything that creates doubt on your side of the table in addition to mine." He paused. He doesn't need it to be real. He needs it to be unverifiable in the 45 minutes between when the officer reads it and when our interview begins. Nyla stood in the cold afternoon air in front of the farmhouse and felt the fear of it differently than she had felt any fear in this process. Not the fear of deportation. She had lived with that for weeks, and it had been manageable because it was concrete and had solutions you could work toward. This was different. This was the fear of being made into something you were not, in a room where you could not prove otherwise fast enough, in front of a person whose job was to look for reasons not to believe you. Her hands were cold. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. "What can we do?" June said. Jinhuan was quiet for a moment. Then something happened in his face. The same recalibration she had seen in the kitchen the night before. The grief or fear being filed. The functional mind coming forward. But this time it was different. This time there was something underneath the functionality that had not been there before. Something that looked like a man who had decided, quietly and completely, that he was done being careful about the things that mattered. "Nothing tonight," he said. "Tonight we prepare." He looked at Nyla. "Every document you have from your time in Atlanta, every financial record, bank statements, tax filings, gallery contracts, anything that establishes your history before you came here, all of it." He paused. "Whatever he surfaces, we bury it in paper. And if the paper isn't enough," she said. He looked at her. "Then we say what's true." His voice was quiet and completely certain. "All of it. Every part of it, whatever they ask." She nodded. They went inside. The afternoon moved toward evening. The mountains went dark around the farmhouse. June made dinner that no one ate much of. They worked at the kitchen table, the three of them, building the document case, organized, indexed, complete. Jinhuan's lawyer called at 9, with confirmation that the notarized choice statement had been received by the Agricultural Authority and that any acceleration attempt before the formal assessment would now face an immediate legal challenge. One wall down. One still standing, and behind it, a man who had been waiting 18 months and who had made a phone call to an immigration officer's office and planted something in the record that they would not see until they were sitting in the chair. At 11 p.m., Jinhuan looked up from the documents and said, "You should sleep. You need to be sharp tomorrow." "So do you." "I don't sleep well before things like this." "Neither do I." She looked at him across the table. "So we're even." He looked at her for a moment, something in his face that was not the controlled surface and not the unguarded fraction, something fully present, fully chosen, the look of a man who has decided to stop managing the distance between himself and the thing he cares about. "Nyla." "What?" "Whatever happens tomorrow." He stopped. Started again. "However it goes, I want you to know that I—" He stopped again. His jaw was tight. The words were not coming the way he wanted them to. She could see it. The particular frustration of a precise man whose precision was failing him in the place where it most needed to work. "I know," she said, quiet. He looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes," she said. "I know." The lamp between them. The documents spread across the table. The farmhouse around them, old and solid and carrying 40 years of a family's weight in its walls. Outside, the orchard in the dark, the bare trees in their rows, everything stripped down to what it actually was. She reached across the table, her hand on his. He turned his hand over and held hers the way he had in the car, completely, without reservation. They sat like that for a while, neither of them talking, the night moving around the farmhouse, and in the morning they were going to walk into a government building and sit across from a trained officer and be asked to prove, under conditions specifically designed to find the lie, that what had happened between them was real. And it was real. That was the thing. That was the only thing that mattered now, and also the thing that terrified her most, because the truth was not the safe option. The truth was the most exposed thing she had ever carried into a room, and tomorrow she was going to lay it down on a government desk in front of a stranger and find out whether it was enough. The interview was in 9 hours. She held his hand across the table and felt her own heartbeat in her palm and thought, whatever happens in that room, I'm not walking out of it as someone who is afraid to say what was true. She thought, that has to be enough. And somewhere in the dark on the other side of the mountain, in a hotel room in Cheongju that he had booked under a company name, Park Sung-jae was looking at his phone, and the message his contact had confirmed was delivered, and he was certain, completely, professionally certain, that tomorrow would end the way he had planned it to end for 18 papum. Park Sung-jae was wrong about one thing. He had planned for Jin Hwan to be afraid. He had built the entire architecture of the trap around the premise that a man who had walked away from power and retreated to a mountain farm with 18 million in debt and a criminal record would, when the walls closed in, behave like a man who had something to lose, would hesitate, would manage, would try to protect himself by controlling the narrative rather than releasing it. He did not know Nyla Brooks. She was awake at 4:30, not anxious wakefulness, the clean, purposeful alertness of a body that has decided what it is going to do and is simply waiting for the moment to do it. She lay in the dark of the east-facing room and listened to the orchard and thought about the interview with the particular quality of attention she brought to a canvas before she began. Not planning exactly, more like clearing. Removing everything that was not essential. Finding the true shape of the thing underneath all the accumulated strategy and fear and careful management. The true shape was simple. She loved him. She was going to say so in a government building to a stranger whose job was to find the lie in it, and she was not going to flinch. She heard him at 5. The familiar sound of him moving through the house, the particular rhythm of it, which she had learned the way you learn the sounds of a place that has become yours, not by studying it, but by living inside it until it stops being noise and starts being texture. She heard the front door. She heard the orchard, him in it, in the dark before dawn, doing the thing he did every morning, which was walk the rows of his father's trees in the cold and the quiet and whatever he carried that he would not put down. She got up. She got dressed. She went downstairs and made coffee. And when he came back in from the orchard, his boots were damp and his breath was still visible, and he stopped when he saw her at the kitchen table with 2 cups. He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down," she said. "Drink your coffee. We have 2 hours." He sat. He drank. They did not run the questions again. They had run the questions 100 times, and either they knew them or they didn't. And running them again at 5 in the morning was not going to change anything except make them sound more rehearsed. Instead, they sat in the kitchen of the farmhouse, in the mountain dark, and drank their coffee and let the silence be what it was, which was not empty. June appeared at 6:15, fully dressed, hair actually combed, which Nyla understood as his version of armor. He looked at them both. He poured himself coffee. He sat at the end of the table and said, without looking up, "You're going to be fine." "You don't know that," Jin Hwan said. "No," June said. "But I know you." He looked at his brother. "Both of you, so I'm saying it anyway." They left at 7. The drive to the immigration office in Seoul was 3 hours. Jin Hwan drove and Neela sat in the passenger seat, and the mountains moved away behind them as the road descended toward the city, the landscape loosening and then filling and then becoming Seoul around them in its layers, the outer rings, the density building, the river, the glass. The 11 million people going about the business of their lives with no particular interest in what was happening in one car on one road on this specific morning. She watched the city come back. She thought, 6 weeks ago I was standing in this city with 22 hours left and I called him. She thought, I would do it again. They found parking 2 blocks from the immigration complex. They walked. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of day that felt deliberately indifferent to human drama. Bright sky, hard light, no weather to use as metaphor. They walked side by side on the sidewalk, and she felt him beside her with the full awareness of someone who has stopped pretending that proximity is neutral. At the building entrance, he stopped. She stopped. He looked at the building, then at her. His face was doing the thing it had done in the car on the mountain road. Present, chosen, the distance closed. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "I know. I need to say it." "Then say it." He looked at her. "I'm sorry I made the rule." She held his gaze. "I'm not," she said. "If you hadn't made it, we would have moved too fast and missed all the parts in between. And the parts in between," she paused, "that's where I found out who you actually are." He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face that was full and unguarded and completely his. He reached out and his hand cupped the side of her face briefly. 3 seconds, just that, warm against the cold morning air. And then he dropped his hand and said, "Let's go." Room 4B was at the end of a corridor on the 4th floor. Gray carpet, fluorescent light, the standard institutional palette of a place designed to process rather than comfort. They checked in at the desk and were told to wait, and they sat in the plastic chairs and did not speak and did not look at each other, which was its own kind of communication. At 9:47, a door opened. Officer Lim Jae-wook was in his mid-40s, heavy-set, with the face of a man who had been doing this job long enough that he had seen every variety of human desperation and had developed a professional immunity to being moved by it. He looked at them, one look, quick and comprehensive, and said their names in Korean and English both, and gestured them inside. The room was small. A table, 3 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner, recording. Officer Lim sat across from them and opened a folder and took his time with it. Neela kept her hands flat on the table. She could feel Jin Hwan breathing beside her, steady, deliberate. Lim looked up. "I'll be direct," he said in English for her benefit. "This interview was flagged before you arrived this morning. I received a supplementary submission yesterday evening from a third party raising concerns about both the validity of this marriage and the backgrounds of both applicants." He paused. "I want you to know that I have read it, and I want to give you the opportunity to address it before we proceed with the standard interview." Neela felt Jin Hwan's posture change beside her. Not a flinch, not tension, something more like settling, like a man who has been waiting for the worst to arrive and is almost relieved it's finally in the room. "What specifically does it allege?" Jin Hwan said. His English was precise, unhurried. Lim looked at the folder. "Regarding you, Mr. Seo, extensive documentation of your prior criminal associations, which I note you disclosed in your application, so that is not new information. Additionally, an allegation that the current debt situation on your family's agricultural property constitutes evidence of financial instability that would make you an unsuitable sponsoring spouse." He turned a page. "Regarding Ms. Brooks, an allegation of undisclosed prior criminal associations in the United States, specifically a claimed connection to an Atlanta-based financial fraud case from 2017. The room was very quiet. Nyla felt the specific quality of the allegation land, not in her chest, where fear lived, but lower, in her gut, where anger lived. Precise, cold anger. The 2017 case was real. It had nothing to do with her. A gallery owner she had shown work with briefly had been investigated for grant fraud. She had been interviewed once as a witness, had cooperated fully, had never been charged with anything, had never been named as anything other than a person who happened to have shown work in that space. It was exactly what Sung Jae had promised it would be. Not a lie, exactly, just a real thing, presented without context, designed to look like something it wasn't. She looked at Officer Lim. "The 2017 Atlanta case," she said. "I know which one you mean. I was interviewed as a witness. I was never charged, never named as a suspect, never implicated in any financial irregularity. I have documentation." She opened her folder on the table and found it without hesitation. She had put it third from the top last night because she had known, or had made herself prepare for the possibility that she had known. She slid it across. "Interview transcript from the Atlanta field office, letter of clearance, and my complete U.S. financial records from 2015 through 2019, which show no irregularities of any kind. Lim took the documents. He looked at them. He looked at her. "The gallery owner was convicted," she said. "I testified at the trial, for the prosecution." A pause. Something shifted in Lim's expression. Not sympathy, not apology. Just a recalibration, the professional acknowledgement of a document that said what it said. "I see," he said. He set the documents aside, face up, visible. Then he looked at Jin Hwan. "The financial instability allegation." Jin Hwan reached into his own folder. "Notarized statement from the original loan officer attesting that my father's application contained no misrepresentation." "Oh, awesome." He slid it across. "Submitted yesterday to the Agricultural Regulatory Authority, copy included." Any acceleration demand made under the misrepresentation clause before the formal assessment date is without legal foundation and has been formally challenged. He paused. The third party who submitted the supplementary filing to this office is the current holder of our agricultural loan. His name is Park Sung-jae. He is also a former senior member of a criminal organization that I left 4 years ago. His submission to this office is not a good faith concern about immigration integrity. It is an attempt to use this process as a mechanism in a private dispute. He held Lim's gaze. I recognize that is a significant claim. I have documentation. He laid it out. Every piece in order. The loan purchase timeline. The holding company structure. The correspondence through Jin Hwan's lawyer establishing the conflict of interest. The timing. The submission to the immigration office made 20 hours before the interview, cross-referenced with the assessment visit attempted without proper notice the day before. Lim read. He read carefully, which Nyla respected. He was not performing thoroughness. He was actually doing it, taking the time the documents required. The camera in the corner blinked its small red light. The fluorescent light hummed. When Lim finished, he closed his folder. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at them both for a moment. Not the professional assessment look, something more direct. I'm going to set the supplementary filing aside, he said, and we're going to conduct the standard interview. He paused. I'd like to understand how this marriage came to be. So they told him, not the rehearsed version, not the constructed narrative they had drilled at the kitchen table for 10 days. The real version, the gallery opening 6 years ago, the painting, the 20 minutes of conversation that became a year of something neither of them had a clean name for. The ending of it, because his world was violent, and she had not been willing to be afraid in her own life. The 4 years of silence. The phone call at 11:47 at night with 22 hours left on a visa and a name in her contacts she had never deleted because deleting it would have meant pretending a person had not mattered to her. She talked. He talked. Sometimes they talked over each other slightly, not competing, just both reaching for the same memory from different angles, which was its own kind of evidence. Lim listened and occasionally asked questions, small, precise questions, the kind designed to test whether the story had been built or lived. What was the weather the night you called him? What did you eat for dinner the first night at the farmhouse? What did you argue about? The argument. The boots. The orchard in the cold with his hands adjusting hers on the tool. The storm. The rows of trees. The 2 hours in the dark working side by side without words, because the situation did not require words. The kitchen table covered in bank documents at 1 a.m, his hand covering hers. She talked about the rule. She said it plainly, without apology. He had made a rule against falling in love because he had learned, over years of violence and betrayal, that the people closest to him were the most vulnerable to being used as leverage. She said, the rule was not manipulation or indifference. It was the action of a man trying to protect something by keeping it far away from himself. She said, it didn't work. Jin Hwan sat beside her while she said this. He did not look at the table. He looked at Lim directly and let it be said. Lim wrote something. He looked up. He looked at Jin Hwan. You left the organization voluntarily. Yes. Why? Jin Hwan was quiet for a moment. Because I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, he said. And because my father was dead and the land was going to be lost, and I thought... He paused. The words were not flowing easily, which was itself honest. I thought if I came back to the land, I could figure out what I was supposed to be, outside of all of it. Another pause. I'm still figuring that out. Lim looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Nyla. Ms. Brooks, if your residency is approved, your intention is to remain in Korea. Yes. Based at the agricultural property. For now. Permanently, I hope. She looked at him steadily. I have work here. I have a life here. And I have... She stopped for 1 second. One only. I have reasons to stay that have nothing to do with a visa. Lim wrote something. He closed his notebook. I'm going to take a short recess, he said. 15 minutes. He stood, gathered his folder, and left the room. The door closed. The camera blinked. Jin Hwan exhaled. It was the first time she had heard him exhale with the full weight of what he'd been holding. Not controlled, not deliberate, just the body releasing something it had been bracing against. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands over his face for a moment. She put her hand on his back, between his shoulder blades. She could feel his breathing through her palm. "You did fine," she said. He lowered his hands. He looked at the table. "You did better." "We did the same." He looked at her sideways, something in his face that was tired and real and entirely without performance. "Nyla." "I know," she said. "I know." Lim came back in 11 minutes. He sat. He opened the folder to a specific page. He looked at it and then looked at them and said, "Residency approved, conditional on annual review for the first 2 years, standard for this application type. You'll receive the formal documentation within 5 business days." He paused. "Congratulations." She heard the word from a slight distance, the way you hear things when your nervous system is processing too many things at once. She sat very still for a moment, then she nodded. "Thank you." Lim was already closing the folder with the efficiency of a man who had 12 more interviews today. "One more thing," he said, not unkindly. "The supplementary filing from the third party. I'm required to note it in the record, but I'm also noting the documentation you provided establishing the context of the filing and the identity of the filer." He looked at Jin Hwan. "If Mr. Park Sung-jae pursues further interference with an approved immigration proceeding, that becomes a separate matter, for a different office." A pause. "I'd suggest your lawyer is aware of that." "He is," Jin Hwan said. Lim nodded. He stood. They shook hands. He left. They sat in the empty room for a moment. The camera blinked. The fluorescent light hummed. Everything was exactly the same as it had been, and nothing was the same at all. Jin Hwan stood. He helped her up, his hand in hers, and did not release it when she was standing. They walked out of room 4B and down the corridor and into the elevator and through the lobby and out through the glass doors into the Seoul afternoon, and the city was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and going. And she stood on the front steps of the immigration complex and felt the cold air on her face and the specific, full-body sensation of something that had been crushing her chest for weeks lifting all at once. He was looking at her. She looked back at him. "It's done," she said. "It's done. The assessment is tomorrow. My lawyer will handle it. The choice statement and the conflict of interest documentation. Sung-jae has no legal basis. He'll know that by this afternoon." He paused. "He'll pull back. And if he doesn't, then we fight it through the courts and we win slower." He said it with complete certainty, not bravado, the certainty of a man who has looked at a problem from all angles and knows which way it falls. "The land isn't going anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment. Seoul moved around them on all sides. She thought about the first time she had stood outside this building 6 weeks ago with a folder of documents and a marriage certificate and the specific sensation of having crossed a line she could not uncross. She thought about how different it felt to be standing here now. Not lighter exactly, because nothing about the past 6 weeks had been light, but different, truer, more completely herself than she had been in a long time, possibly than she had ever been, because she was standing beside someone who had seen her at her worst and her most frightened and her most stubborn and her most exposed, and she had seen the same in him, and here they were. "Take me home," she said. He looked at her. She saw the word land in him, home, what it meant when she said it, what it indicated about the place it referred to and what she considered it to be. She saw him decide to let it mean what it meant. "Yes," he said. They drove back through Seoul and out the other side, the city releasing them the way it always did. Gradually, reluctantly, the density thinning and the horizon opening and the mountains appearing again on the far side of the flat winter land. She fell asleep somewhere near Cheonan, her head against the window, and he let her sleep and did not wake her until the gravel drive. And she came awake to the sight of the farmhouse in the late afternoon gold, and the orchard behind it, and June standing on the front steps because he had heard the car on the road. She got out. June looked at her face. He looked at his brother's face. "Approved," she said. June closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he opened them and he said, "I'll make dinner." And he went inside. And she understood that this was his way of doing everything he needed to do with what he was feeling, which was to feed people, which was enough. The assessment visit came the next morning as scheduled. 2 representatives from Park Sung-jae's holding company arrived at 9. Jin Huan's lawyer was already there in person, which Nyla suspected had required an early drive from Seoul and had cost money they had not budgeted for, and which Jin Huan had arranged without mentioning. The lawyer met the representatives at the property line with the notarized choice statement, the conflict of interest documentation, and a formal notice that any acceleration demand would be immediately challenged, and that the interference with an active immigration proceeding had been noted on official record. The representatives made 2 calls. They conferred. They left at 9:37 without entering the property. She watched from the studio window, the gravel settling after their car, the bare orchard in the morning light, the mountains. Jin Huan came inside. He found her at the studio window. He stood behind her and looked at what she was looking at. "It's over," she said. "The immediate threat is over," he said. "Sung-jae will pursue other avenues. Legal ones, slower. We'll handle them." He paused. "He doesn't have the direct weapon anymore. Because of Choi. Because of Choi, and because of you." He was quiet for a moment. "The 2017 documentation. You had it in the 3rd position in the folder. I prepared for it. You prepared for a specific attack that you could not have known was coming. I prepared for the kind of attack a man like that would make. There's a difference." She turned around. He was closer than she expected, which meant she was looking up at him at a distance that was no longer the distance of careful management. "I know how to read a situation," she said. "You're not the only one." Something in his face, the expression that was becoming familiar to her now, the one that was not the controlled surface and not the fractured, unguarded moment, but the third thing, the thing that was both at once, the expression of a man who has stopped choosing between being honest and being safe. "No," he said, "I'm not." He kissed her. Not the way she had imagined it in the peripheral spaces of her mind during the weeks of careful distance. Not dramatic, not the release of accumulated tension. Just present, just completely quietly real, his hands on her face and her hands against his chest, and the studio light coming through the north windows the way it always did, clear and unhurried and indifferent to anything except the true shape of things. When he pulled back, he looked at her with the full weight of what he was, the scar above his eye, the rough hands, the 40-year-old family debt and the criminal record and the pear orchard and the man underneath all of it who had stood in front of her painting for 4 minutes 16 years younger and heard everything she said and asked the one question that proved it. "The rule," she said. "Gone," he said. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since the storm," he said. "I just needed to be honest about it." She laughed. It came out of her before she could manage it. Not polite laughter, not the social kind, genuine laughter, the surprised kind that arrives when something is true in a way you weren't expecting. He looked at her laughing, and something in his face did the thing she would spend years afterward thinking about. It opened, all the way, no architecture, no management, just the man himself, and he looked briefly and completely, like someone who had forgotten that this was a thing that could happen to him. She reached up and put her hand on the side of his face. He turned into it slightly, involuntary, the way you turn toward warmth. "We have a lot of work to do," she said. "Yes." "The debt isn't gone." "No." "The orchard needs 3 good seasons." "Yes." "And the immigration review is annual for 2 years." "Yes." He covered her hand with his. "Are you making a list?" "I'm making a list." "Add to it," he said, "that the east section needs replanting in spring, and the cold storage compressor is going to need replacement before next harvest. And June is going to fall apart when he finds out you're staying permanently and will probably cook an enormous amount of food to cope with it." She looked at him. "He already knows." "Yes," Jin Huan said. "He's known since the storm." The months that followed were not easy. They were not supposed to be easy. That was not the kind of life the orchard or the mountains or the 2 people living in that farmhouse were built for. The agricultural bank's formal proceedings moved slowly, contested at each stage, and Park Sung-jae pursued 2 additional legal angles that Jin Huan's lawyer dismantled over the course of 5 months, each one slower and less threatening than the last, the actions of a man running out of ammunition and knowing it. The first commercial installation contract Nyla signed paid 3 times what she had projected. The second paid more. She hired a sole logistics firm to handle transport of the large format work and spent the money she saved on time back at the farmhouse. And the farmhouse was where she worked best anyway. in the studio with the north light and the sound of the orchard outside the window. She painted the orchard through the seasons. The bare winter rose became the white explosion of spring pear blossoms, so extreme and sudden that the first morning she walked out and saw it, she stood on the back step for a full 5 minutes, unable to move, just looking. She painted it. She painted the summer green, the hanging fruit, the particular quality of mountain light at harvest. She painted Jin Huan's hands. She painted June asleep at the kitchen table over the financial spreadsheets. She painted the mountains in every weather, and the farmhouse from the orchard, and the orchard from the farmhouse window and the studio itself, light coming through the north glass, empty and full at once. A soul gallery approached her in the spring about a solo show. She said yes, on the condition that the show include rural work, orchard paintings, mountain landscapes, the domestic interiors of a life lived in a specific place. The gallery director had expected the large format urban work that had made her reputation. He came to the farmhouse to see the new paintings and stood in the studio for a long time without speaking, and then he said, "In the particular way that people who work in art say true things about it, these are different from everything you've done before." She said, "I know." He said, "They're better." She did not tell him why. She thought she knew, partially. The light was different. The space was different. The life that the work came out of was different. But she also thought it was something else, something she could not have made in Seoul in her studio apartment alone, something that required a particular kind of not being alone that she had never been willing to trust before. The debt was reduced to 4 million by the end of the first year. The balloon payment was restructured under the original agricultural bank's oversight after Sungjae's holding company was audited by the regulatory authority, an audit that had been triggered by a complaint from, among others, a 71-year-old retired loan officer in Cheongju who had, it turned out, kept very careful records of all his interactions over the course of 3 decades in the agricultural lending business. The restructured payment schedule gave them 3 years. The orchard gave them 2 good harvests. The third was the best in 40 years. In October, on an evening when the light was the specific color of honey and exhaustion, Nyla was sitting on the back step of the farmhouse watching Jin Huan and June finish the last of the harvest work on the east section. She had paint on her hands and mud on her boots, and she had not slept enough, and she was in a way that had nothing to do with being rested or comfortable or safe from all possible future difficulty, entirely at peace. Jin Huan came across the field toward her. He had a pear in his hand. He sat down beside her on the step, close enough that their shoulders touched, and he cut the pear with his knife, and handed her half, and ate his half, and looked at the orchard in the evening light. The east section yield was up 14%, he said. June told me. He's been tracking the soil pH since March. I know. He showed me the charts. She ate her half of the pear. It was cold and sweet with the specific flavor of fruit that has had the exact right amount of light and cold and time. Your father would have been proud of him. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. He would. They sat on the step. The light went gold and then darker. June came across the field in the dusk, saw them on the step, changed direction toward the house's other entrance with the tact that was so deeply ingrained in him now it had stopped requiring thought. She heard the kitchen door, the sound of water running, the beginning of something being cooked. "I've been thinking about the rule," she said. He looked at her sideways. "Not about breaking it," she said, "about why you made it, and what it took for you to undo it." She looked at the orchard. "I think you were right to make it, for the version of your life that existed when you made it." She paused. "I just think you got the timing wrong on when to undo it." He was quiet for a moment. "When should I have undone it?" "Day 2, she said. Something moved in his face. The thing she loved most in his face. The expression that was not the controlled surface and not the unguarded fraction, but the third thing. The expression that was only his, that she had watched emerge over months from underneath the years of careful management, like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the conditions to be safe enough to be seen. He was smiling. Not the performance of a smile. The real thing, small and quiet and entirely his. The smile of a man who has found something he stopped believing was findable and is still, after all these months, not entirely used to having it. "Day 2, he said. "You made the boots work on day 1, she said. "Day 2 would have been aggressive, but defensible." He laughed. The same quality as her laughing in the studio, surprised, real, the kind that arrives before the management can catch it. She leaned her head against his shoulder and felt him settle against her, his arm coming around her. And the orchard was dark now, and the kitchen light was on, and inside June was cooking something that smelled of garlic and sesame and the specific warmth of a house that had people in it. She thought about Atlanta. She thought about her mother, who had visited in the summer and had stood in the studio and looked at the north light and said, in the particular tone of a woman who had been skeptical for years and was revising, "Okay, I see it." She thought about the gallery opening in September, the orchard paintings on white walls, the Seoul art community standing in front of images of a mountain farmhouse and a bare pear orchard, and the hands of people doing real work, finding in them something they had not been looking for and could not quite name. She thought about the immigration office waiting room, the fluorescent light, the plastic chairs, the clerk who had stamped the document and said congratulations and moved on to the next number. She thought about a name in her contacts that she had never deleted. She thought, I knew what I was doing when I called him. I just didn't know how much I knew. The mountain was dark. The orchard was quiet. The farmhouse was warm at their backs. Above them, the sky was doing the thing it did up here, away from the city, filling with stars in the unhurried, total way that was only possible when there was nothing between you and the dark except clean air and distance. He pressed his mouth to her temple. She closed her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he said. She thought about it for a moment, then she said, "The first painting I'll do next spring, when the blossoms come." She felt him nod, slowly, his chin against her hair. "What will it look like?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the part I like." The night settled around them. The stars came out one at a time and then all at once. Somewhere in the farmhouse, June called out that dinner was ready, his voice carrying through the kitchen window into the dark, and she did not move immediately. Neither did he. They sat on the back step of a 40-year-old farmhouse on the side of a Korean mountain with pear trees in the dark around them, and a debt that was almost gone, and a life that was fully, completely, irreversibly theirs. Then she stood. She reached down and offered him her hand. He looked at it for a second, paint on her knuckles, mud on her sleeve, the hand of someone who had worked the harvest and worked the studio and made something real out of both. Then he took it, and she pulled, and he stood, and they went inside.